there we go. Okay, so like we talked about last class, we cannot write to the desktop. We can't write to the C drive. We don't want to work off of the servers. We could work off of a secondary drive. I typically don't like to work off of a thumb drive. Sometimes I'll open a file just to check it or whatever, but I hardly ever work off of anything but the actual station itself or an external actual hard drive, okay? So on these computers we have a secondary drive dedicated to what we're going to be using, okay? But again, you always want to back that up at the end of the day. So on your start menu here, if you haven't used a PC in a while, on the start menu you can go to computer and you'll see that there is a P drive, okay? On the P drive, it should be pretty empty. These computers are brand new. If there is stuff there, don't delete anything because it's probably someone else's work. Mine is not, because I have files that are already on here that I've already started to organize. So what we want to do is go into the P drive, and up on the top you'll see there's a new folder button. You want to click that new folder button and make a new folder entitled your last name underscore 26 F 2016. So inside of your F Sarcona Fall 2016 folder, we want to create 2 folders inside here. These are different than the ones I used previous semester, so if you've had me before, these are going to be a little bit different. We're going to make a work folder and a finished folder. Now it's pretty easy to see. There's our folder, and here are our 2 folders inside here. And it's pretty obvious what should go into each one of these. As we're working on stuff, we put it in the work folder. Once we've completed a movie or completed anything, we can put that finished project inside the finished folder. Eventually we'll come back to these and actually need to redo, or not redo, but use our finished products again, okay? If you have a movie that you've done, everything's ready to go, you can go to the movie and play it. We want to make sure we have that ability to play it. If we worked on something for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, it could take a long time to go through After Effects and re-render out or recalculate all the stuff to make it a movie that we could just play. So we always want to have a finished spot here. Now, one thing that's going to be an issue is how many of you have me, at least, for multiple classes? Several people, okay? So right now, this could get a little bit jumbled because we have a finished folder and a work folder, but we don't have a separate class folder for that. So what we're going to do is create a 3rd folder in here, and we're going to call it what the class number is. So I'm going to call this 2200 because that's our class number. Okay. If you have me for other classes, you can also click the new folder and put in the folder number for those other classes, like 2510 would probably be, several of you have me for 2510, which is the intro class, or 2520, which is the modeling class, or 2540, which is the animation class, okay? So whichever other classes you may have me for, you can add those in there. And then all you have to do is copy these, so I just highlight them, and then I can Alt drag them into each folder. Oops, sorry, Control drag them in each folder. So I just hold the Control key and drag it into each folder. That way I have all of these exact folders. Okay, so I have a 2200 folder for this class. Inside that folder I have finish and work. Okay, 2510, I have that class, so I have a finish and work. Same thing with 2520, same thing with 2540. Okay, so everything that we do needs to stay organized. If you do anything, make sure you're staying organized because it just makes your life easier. You're going to be dealing with Photoshop images, Illustrator images, audio files, pictures, other compositions, animations, a whole list of things, okay? And what we don't want to do is have to be clicking around in 7,000 spots trying to find the stuff every single time we go into it. All right, so this makes everything easier. I'll remind you the first couple weeks to stay organized, and after that, you should just have it instilled in your brain to stay organized, okay? So everyone's good so far. We have our name folder, class folder if needed, and then a finish and work folder. Cool, cool. All right, so then we can close that. We're done with that. So now we're going to open up After Effects. Whenever you open up any Adobe program for the first time, you may not be opening it for the first time it's been opened, and there may be other preferences and things that are not lined up right. So I recommend always holding Control, Alt, and Shift, and then going to Adobe After Effects. And then you just keep holding Control, Alt, and Shift as you do it. I let go too soon. I'll wait, and then I'll close it down again. So I'm holding Control, Alt, Shift. I'm going to Adobe. I'm going to After Effects. I hold it down. There we go. And eventually what it should say is, do you want to delete your preferences? If it doesn't say it, it's no big deal. Just be aware that if you go into After Effects and things look screwy and it's like, I don't know where all my stuff went that I had there, you may want to just reset your preferences, okay? When After Effects boots up, the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to find your files and folders, and then it's also going to do what are called loading the filters. So inside of After Effects, there's a bunch of different filters in. Sir. All right, so the screen that's going to pop up here will say something about ray tracing on the GPU, approved by NVIDIA, CUDA, main call requiring. You can just hit OK. Every time you boot up After Effects in the room, you're going to get that error message. All right, it's just. So if I hit OK, maybe I'll get the other screen. If not, you can just hit it with the X in the top right just to close it. Okay. That's one of the newest things with Adobe, is that they have these things that, you know, they keep changing their interface and adding things in there. So this one is, just to make sure I'm on the same one, 2015.3. Yours might be 2015.5 or something for some reason. Maybe I opened the wrong one. No, it's the same one. Okay. Somehow we have different preferences, or it's still thinking. You can see the little spinning wheel. No, yes, maybe, no, it doesn't matter. Okay, so you can just close it with that top right X just to get rid of it. This is the screen there we go. 6 years later. Yeah, so this may pop up. Just hit close. We don't need to see that. This is the After Effects interface, and it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff inside of After Effects and a lot of different things. Even while we start getting into it, there will be menus inside menus inside menus, and even attributes inside of attributes inside of attributes. Okay, so as we go through this, I'm going to try to point you to the right spots, or to the popular spots, but keep in mind that there is other stuff, and at some point you should kind of explore those things and see what else is out there. Okay. What I want to do is just go through the basic interface. Okay, so you can keep your eyes up here for a minute. Someone stole my pointer again. Right? Yes, it did. Up here at the very top is something you're familiar with from every other program that Adobe has, just the toolbar. Okay, so that toolbar stays consistent throughout what we're doing. Everything is right up here, all the major tools that we're going to use. On your hotkey sheet that passed around, you'll see that there are hotkeys for each one of those things. Okay, and it's not for every single one of them, but all the popular ones are on there. So as we work, we really want to use these hotkeys to jump around to the tools, because it just makes things a lot quicker. Even more so than like a Photoshop or Illustrator, where maybe you're working with the same 2 or 3 tools. In here, you're constantly bouncing around between 4 or 5 different tools. So you don't want to be constantly going up here and down there and wherever else. Over here on the left side, this is your project window. Okay, so the way After Effects works is you can create stuff inside the program. We can create some basic shapes inside the program or effects. But most of the time what we're going to be doing is bringing stuff in. So we might bring in a picture from Illustrator, or a picture from Photoshop, or a video from wherever, okay, or an audio file. And those things will be populated inside of this window here. So here is where everything gets like imported, and then up there is just kind of like the preview and info area of it. So you're not going to do this part. I'm just going to import something so you can see it. Oops, that's the wrong folder. 25. There we go. So I imported a video that I had. So here is the preview of it. Right now it starts off with a black screen, so it's showing me a black screen. It's showing me that there's audio applied to it. Here's the info. Here's the file name, here's the size, here's the duration, here's the compression, and here is the audio compression. There's the file name, it's a QuickTime, it's a gig, and it's 2997 frames per second stuff. Okay, and I can scroll over and see a lot more information about it. Okay, so this area will be very important to also stay organized. So every aspect of this program, we're going to stay organized. Outside the program, inside of this area, and then the next part inside the timeline will also stay organized. Okay, so down here is the timeline. This is where most of the work that we're going to do is going to happen down there. So I'm just going to drag this file down onto the timeline, and you'll see how it populates it. It gives me the name of the file here. It gives me some switches and little buttons I can click. And then over here is a bar. That bar represents the duration of that video. So if I bring in a 2-second video, it's only going to be 2 seconds long. It's not going to be 30 seconds long or 40 seconds long. Okay? If I go and import another video, I'll just import these two. And I bring these two down here, you'll see that this one is shorter than that one. So you can see how it's cut off there. So basically I don't have anything at that point because that video is just not that long. This one that's above it is actually longer than the other one. And I can tell that because if you look at the top right corner, there's a tiny little triangle right here. That tiny little triangle signifies that's the end of that piece of footage. The top one doesn't have that. I gotta scoot this like all the way over to see that. It's really long, so it's really far over. There it is. Okay, so now I can see there's a little triangle right there. Okay, so in the timeline, this is called non-linear editing. That's what After Effects does. Basically, linear editing means that I have to, like, does anyone remember what a VCR is? Okay, a VCR is a linear editing machine. You have your videotape, you play it to this spot, and you stop it, and then you can record something right after it, and then you stop it, then you record something right after it. So we have to start here and we work our way forward and get to the end. After Effects is non-linear, meaning we can jump around to wherever we want and do whatever we want at any time. Okay, it's much easier than a VCR. So that means that I can take this piece of footage and I can literally move this piece of footage wherever I want. If I want this piece of footage to happen way down the line, I can do that. If I want it to happen sooner, I can do that. If I want to just use a section of it, I can crop it. And that's me cropping it. See how the bar color change is a bit different? So now I'm only going to use a small piece of this footage right there. Okay, very quickly we can do that. Now, what After Effects is not is a video editing program, okay? So don't think that if you had 35 videos that you'd want to bring that into After Effects and chop it up and make your final cut of the video, okay? You heard of Premiere or Avid or Final Cut or iMovie or any of those? Those programs are dedicated for video editing, okay? One reason After Effects isn't is because when we play a video like this, it's slow. I'm going to hit the play button. See how slow it's going? It's going a little bit quicker now, okay? The videos here are pretty, there's nothing to them. So they're going to play a little bit quicker. But as we get in here, it's going to go a lot slower, okay? Premiere, Avid, Final Cut, iMovie, all of those are made for just editing videos. This is for effects, added things on top of it, motion graphics, tracking, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to delete these here, delete those there. All right, so up here on top of the timeline, we have this, and that's our time code. Every job that we do is going to have a different time code. You may be working on something that's 5 seconds long, or 30 seconds long, or 2 minutes long, okay? It all depends on what you're doing up here. Sometimes people that are working in industry, they may be working on something that's only 20 frames long, or 90 frames long. There was a shot in Transformers? Yeah, in Transformers, I think it was the second one, where basically the girl's mouth like opens up, and a robot comes out of it. That one shot was about 90 frames, and it took the guy 3 months to do, frame by frame, going on there and drawing out all of the stuff. Sometimes you work on 90 frames. Okay, but that's a lot of the stuff that we're going to do in here is obviously me dealing with the timeline. You'll see that there is a number here as well. This is the exact time that we're on. We can't see over here what time we're on. We know it's between 15 and 30 seconds. This tells us exactly. You're at 21 seconds right here and 8 frames. So it'll tell you exactly how many frames you're at. We will get down to the fact that, or to the point where we're dealing with specific frames. So we'll go to frame 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever. This area up here is our composition window. So whatever we're viewing in our timeline will show up in the composition window. Okay? So if we are editing something, obviously we want to see what we're editing. We want to see what we're doing to it. So it'll show up there. You'll see how it's kind of pixelated because right now it's going into a quicker mode. Because I'm scrubbing through this, it wants to play back as quickly as it can, so it lowers the resolution. It makes it really blocky, but then when I stop, it makes it clear, okay, after a second. Over here are all of our palettes, okay? Just like Photoshop and Illustrator, loads of palettes in here. We'll touch on some of those palettes, not every single one of them. And of course, if you don't see the one you want, it's going to be right here under Window, okay? Just like Photoshop, just like Illustrator, there's all your palettes. They also have workspaces, so depending on what you're doing inside the software, you may want to jump to one of the default workspaces. So something like Effects, I click that, and it resets my workspace, it's going to take a second, to the Effects workspace. Okay, and what that means is it's going to load my effects here. You'll see that all those other panels kind of disappeared, and it's right now trying to load my effects. And this part takes a long time because there's so many different effects and different things loading that it just takes a minute to load. There it goes. Okay, so here's all these different effects and different things inside of it. And then up here is a bunch of other menus that eventually we'll get to. All the effects that just loaded on the right are also right here under the effects menu. The nice thing about using the effects and presets is that you can search for things. So if you're not sure about where something is at, you can look for a ramp. And it'll show you there's where the ramp is, then you can apply that effect to your stuff. We also have layers and layer settings. We have compositions. And then we can edit stuff and then file stuff, okay? So I'm going to delete those and get back to that. All right, so now that we've had just a quick overview of this, let's actually get in here and actually make something inside of After Effects, okay? So in your After Effects, the first thing we have to do is we have to make a composition. So consider like Photoshop or Illustrator, you can't just start drawing in blank space, you have to have a document to put stuff on. In After Effects, that's called the composition. So under Composition, go to New Composition. Okay. This brings up a window that shows us all of our composition settings. So the first thing is always composition name. Always good to name your stuff, because if you don't name it, then you're obviously going to get things lost. So we're playing around, so let's just call this playing around. Okay, so where it says composition name, just give it the name of playing around. As you name things, avoid using spaces or special characters. Okay, so like don't put an asterisk or an @ sign or anything crazy in there. If you need to space things out, use an underscore or capitalize each new word. Or you want to get fancy, you capitalize every word after the first word. That's a fancy thing to do. Here is the basic settings. So the first thing we need to worry about is document size. How big of a document are we making? Is this something that's going to be a video for our phone? Is this something that's going to be a video for an iMac screen or whatever? So this right now is set to 1920 by 1080, and it's HD TV 1080, and it's 2997. Here's a bunch of presets that are inside here. this is pretty much what we're going to stick with the entire semester, 1920 by 1080. So we're not going to have to touch that. The 2997, we'll also leave that. The only thing we're going to come down and change is the duration. So where it says 0, semicolon, 00, semicolon, 30, semicolon, 00, all we're going to do is type 500. Okay, so under duration, type 500. And what that's going to give you is 5 seconds and 0 frames. Okay, so if we wanted something that's 20 seconds, we would type in 2000, and that would give us 20 seconds, 0 frames. All right, and then we just hit OK. All right, so now we have a composition. If you look over in your footage area on the left, you'll see where it says playing. On mine, it says playing ... nd. Okay, yours might say playing around or something similar. So we do have, when we create a composition, that does go into this area here. So I want to stay organized right from the get-go, so I'm going to come down to the new folder button. Okay, right under our composition, it says new folder. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to put comps. Okay, and as simple as anything you've ever done, just drag the playing around into the comps folder. You will have composition, so inside of one document, one composition, one project, you may have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different compositions all feeding into that final image. Okay, think of each comp as a separate video, a separate clip, a separate piece of footage. All right, so now I'm just going to hide the little arrow, so you just click the arrow to hide it. And now what I want to do is create something that I could actually use to animate. Okay, right now there's nothing on there. So over here, do you see where there's a little rectangle? What's the hotkey for our rectangle? Q. So if we hit Q on our keyboard, it'll take us to the rectangle tool. And when we switch to the rectangle tool, over here on the right of that rectangle tool, a couple menu items popped up. A couple of different options showed. So one of those is fill, stroke, and then the size of the stroke. Using Illustrator, which you've all done before, you know what the fill is going to be, you know what the stroke's going to be, and you know what that size of the stroke is going to be. And knowing Adobe, we can change all this stuff after the fact. Okay? So unless we're making a bunch of the same kind of thing, I typically don't worry about it. I make it, I adjust it, and then I move on. Okay? So you can click and drag right inside your window. Okay? So now you should have a red rectangle in the center of your composition. Now you'll notice that it creates the rectangle. We have these little corner points in there, and we also have that guy kind of in the center of it. Do you know what that is? Yeah, the anchor point. Okay, so everything that is going to be animated is going to be centered around that little point. Okay, so if we were to rotate this, I'm going to rotate mine, don't rotate yours yet. If I were to rotate this, you'll see how it doesn't rotate from the center, it's rotating from that little dot. Okay, so that's an important thing to pay attention to, because as we start animating something, if I created a ball and I wanted him to spin around perfectly, I need to make sure that dot is perfectly centered. Okay, so we'll get into those kinds of things later. I just want you to be aware of everything as we're going along. All right, so a couple things. As we created this, I'm going to delete mine and make a new one. When we created this, you'll see down here in our timeline that it fills the entire timeline, right? So we have this dark, bright, vibrant, purpley color. That's showing that that item has filled the entire timeline. We also have these menu items over here. If you've ever used, what other kinds of programs have it? Adobe has it. Photoshop and Illustrator have this kind of thing. These little triangles. Anytime you see a triangle next to something, usually that means you can click on it and it'll open up and then you have more options. Okay? Everything in After Effects is like that. There's more and more and more options to everything. So if we come over here to where it says rectangle, and you click on that triangle, you'll see there are more options. And feel free to adjust the size of your screen too. Like I'm getting to the bottom of my screen. I need to pull this up. So you can click on this bar right here and drag it up. You see how I have the two arrows right there. So I can make that bigger so I can see all of my stuff. Okay, so I just made this bigger, automatically shrinks my comp, and then I can work with this. When you get comfortable with it, you'll actually probably want to take your timeline and drag it over to a different screen. That's usually what people do, because you will have several different layers inside here. All of them have their stuff open, and you need to see all the stuff and see your piece of footage. Okay, obviously I can't do that for this. All right, so you'll see rectangle 1. I'm going to open up rectangle 1 or path 1, and you'll see we have some options inside of here as well. Okay. Now, I drew my rectangle. What I wanted to do was have my rectangle be perfectly centered on my screen. Let's say I wanted to be perfectly centered and fill the entire screen. All right. So if I need this rectangle to be the exact size of this screen, any guesses how big that rectangle would have to be? How big is my screen? 1920 by 1080. Yep, 1920 by 1080. So if I just click on the number here and type in 1920, you'll see that it goes to 1920. And if I type on the other one and put 1080, you'll see that it goes to 1080. What you're also going to see, though, is that the other item went back to some other number. Okay, so I typed 1920, it accepted it. I typed 1080, it accepted it, but changed my first number. So how do I get it to not change both numbers when I change it? Unlink them, right? We've used that before in other programs. So click the unlink, unchain. And now they're unlinked, unchained. Okay. And then underneath, you'll see that it's created it. It looks like it's about the right size, but it's not perfectly centered on my screen. I could go to my arrow tool and try to move it in there and get it locked in, but it's not locked in yet. So I'm going to go down to where it says transform rectangle and open that up. Not the regular transform, but the one that says transform rectangle. And on transform rectangle, you see there's a position that says 60, on mine anyway, 60 and 42. I'm just going to put those back to 0. Okay, so my position under my transform rectangle is 0, 0. My size under my rectangle is set to 1920 by 1080. All right, so all that work that we did, we drew a rectangle, we went under the one option, unlinked it, 1920 by 1080. We went to the other option, set it to 0, 0, right? Right, a lot of work. Delete your shape layer 1. So we just click on it and hit the delete key, and it goes away. All that hard work, dang. Okay, so you may have to scroll up depending on how far down it is. So your timeline should be blank right now. Yeah, delete the whole thing from there. Okay, so you have nothing in the timeline. Rectangle 1 is all gone, completely blank. Now if you double click your rectangle, so go up to the rectangle tool and just double click it. And look what it does. It makes a rectangle perfectly sized to fit that. Okay? So sometimes we will need to go in there and create something by double clicking it to fill it. Sometimes we need to go into the options. Yes, sir?
And also the same information that we typed before still retains in your rectangle.
It's not retaining it, it's just automatically sizing it to your comp. Okay? So delete the shape layer 1 again so that we're back to having nothing there. And then change it from a rectangle to an ellipse. Okay, and you can also get there by just hitting Q until it turns to an ellipse. There it is. Okay, and then double click the ellipse. All right, So now when we created the ellipse, it's not a circle, it creates an ellipse. It creates a rounded shape. So if I needed a ball in this shape, I needed a perfectly round ball, this is where I'd have to go into those options and specify I want this to be round. So I would, you don't have to do this part, I would go into ellipse, I would go into my path, I would unlink this, and I would set this to be 1080 by 1080, both the same size, perfectly round, good to go. Okay? So now take a couple minutes and look at the different tools that are here. And then look at the different options also, because some of these, like the rounded rectangle, has different options inside this. The star tool also has a bunch of different options that we can play with. So take like 5 minutes, make some different shapes, give them different colors just by going up to that fill. And then play with their options just to kind of get used to adding shapes and then changing some of those parameters. All right, so a lot of our initial assignments that we're going to do are going to be based off of using shape layers and using some other just default kinds of things. One thing you may notice is that as you made more than one shape, they all kind of went onto the single shape layer. Okay, some of you had this, where as you made another shape, I'll make a polygon, and I'll color this a different color. There we go. You'll see that I get a different shape layer. Okay, so this is one of the things that can be kind of tricky as you do this, is that as you're making shapes, if you're selected on a shape layer already and you start adding shapes to it, it'll just add it inside that one thing. So if you're making like a gear, let's say, and on that gear you want to have a certain star shape with some edges cut off and you want to have holes in it, that's perfect. That's like one big shape layer. If you want to have separate gears, you may duplicate that shape layer and have separate gears or instances of it. Okay? We could even use, I'm just going to delete my shape layers, the pen tool, and you'll see that I can use the pen tool to create my own custom shapes. Okay, so anything you would be able to do with the pen tool, you can do just like that and make your own custom shapes. It still has a fill to it, it still has a stroke. I can adjust all of my parameters and then switch it, move it, and scale it, and do whatever I need to do. Okay, now because this is kind of like an organic shape, I don't have those same properties that I would have otherwise because it's custom. So I don't have, if I open this up, you'll see that I don't have a here's my path. There's no like size there. It doesn't say 1920 by 1080. I don't have anything I can punch in to get it because it's basically a custom shape. Okay, so sometimes we'll also use these custom shapes to drop those in here too. Most of the time, it's for basic stuff, it's easier just to use After Effects. You're not linking to any other programs or files or anything. But when we get to more complex stuff, like if we were to do a gear, it's much easier to do it outside of After Effects, to do it inside of Illustrator, and then just bring that gear inside of here. And if we need to change a color, we can do that. If we need to change a size or rotation or anything, we can do all that stuff here. Illustrator has a bunch more tools also for aligning and distributing, stepping and repeating, changing width, weights of edges and all that. We don't have all those tools available right inside of After Effects. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a bouncing ball. That's going to be our first thing. So any shapes you have there, just wipe them. Just delete anything that you have. Make sure your timeline is empty again. Okay. Once your timeline's empty, we're going to make a sphere, a circle. So I'm going to go to my ellipse tool and double click it. I'm then going to go under my ellipse path and make sure that it's round and small. So something like 200 pixels should be plenty big. Okay, so I just changed the size under the ellipse path to 200 by 200. So that should give us a round shape. I also took my stroke off. I don't need the stroke. You You can also pick a pleasant color to work with. That looks pleasant. Okay, and just so you know too, you have options. If you click on the word stroke, you can actually turn it to no stroke if you wanted to. Or you can click on the word fill and you can change it to a no fill but have a stroke. So there's like insane amount of options like everywhere. You just have to know where to click. Okay, so now that we have a circle and it's centered in our screen, what we want to do is we want to move that item. Okay, I want to move it to, I'm going to imagine that there is a flat area right about here, right in the middle. That would be kind of like a ground plane. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control R first. What does Control R do? Rulers. Okay, and why would we pull up rulers?
Something to define the ground space.
Right. So if you remember from InDesign, Photoshop's used them, I'm sure Illustrator's used them. Remember guides? We can drop in a guideline. It's not going to render. It's not going to be anything. So I'm just going to drag a guideline from my ruler to about where I want that ground to be. Okay? Don't get it too close to the top, obviously, because you want to have room to jump around. So we hit Control R. That pulls up the ruler. I drag from here down arbitrarily. There's no specific number. Just kind of like, that looks like a good spot for a ground to be. Now I want to take the ball and move it straight down so that he's sitting on the ground. If you're moving something and you want to move it straight up and down, what button do I need to hold? Shift. So I hold Shift and I drag the ball until it snaps to the ground. All right, so what we want to do is we want to animate the ball bouncing, okay? After Effects uses what's called auto key. Auto key means anytime you change a parameter, once you've initiated to say I want to animate this thing, it'll automatically set keyframes, okay? So right now I've moved the ball from up to down. That's not animated because I've never told After Effects I want to start animating the movement going up and down, okay? So what I need to do is, in this huge list of attributes that are here, I need to isolate the one attribute that is in charge of movement up and down. And that movement up and down is called position, okay? And if you look on your list here, there's a bunch of hotkeys right under the layers area. Which one is the hotkey for position? P. Okay? So if I click on P, you'll see that it isolates just that positional attribute. Okay, so if we know that we're going to be setting keyframes for position, there it is. We hit P, it pops up. If we hit P again, it goes away. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to set keyframes. Now After Effects will do what's called tweening. All right, basically we have a keyframe here, a keyframe here, and it blends between those two keyframes. So we don't have to go frame by frame to set keyframes. We can just set some major pose points and it'll automatically interpolate between them. Okay, so we have to set our first point. Now before we do any keyframes first, I want to get an idea of what we want to happen, okay? All right, so I need to make sure that on frame 1, it's actually frame 0, frame 0 is right here, okay? See the little ticker? That ticker says what time I'm at. It says where I'm at in my timeline. My 0's here, everything is zeroed out. So I'm basically at that starting point where the ball should be on the ground. So I'm going to go over to this little stopwatch that's next to position, and I'm just going to click that position. Okay? Now make sure you just see this one word position. You don't see a whole list of other things there. So this stopwatch says I'm going to animate this item. So from now on, anytime I move that item, set a keyframe for that item. Okay? That's all it does. Hit P, Steve.
Oops, I keep hitting Control. Sorry.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're at frame 1 or 0. We've set our first keyframe. You'll also see that there's a little diamond. It's hard to see because my cursor's over it. but there's a little diamond right there. That diamond is a keyframe that basically locks in that information at that time. Now, what was our next step in our animation? 30, right? So 30 frames, not 30 seconds. That would be an incredibly boring animation to watch a ball move up for 30 seconds. So 30 frames, which is about 1 second, we can either go over here and I can click and type in 30 and it'll jump me there, or I can just drag my little stopwatch until I get to 1 second. Okay? Not the stopwatch, drag the little ticker. So I can drag this ticker right to 1 second. Okay, once the ticker is there at 1 second, I'm going to do the exact same thing we did to drag the ball down. I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to drag the ball up. I have to drag first and then hold Shift. Or the second we let go from dragging, we got an extra diamond in our timeline. Okay? That diamond, again, is a keyframe, so it automatically says, here's your keyframe at 0, here's your keyframe at 30, and then we'll go ahead and set the last keyframe. So what's our last keyframe going to be at? 60 or 2. So we just drag it over to 2, hold down Shift. Oh, sorry. Sometimes you can hold Shift before you drag. Sometimes you have to start dragging and then hold Shift. Fine. We want to preview our animation, so there's 2 ways we can do that. One way is, any guesses? What do you use to play your VLC or your QuickTime? Spacebar, right? So same thing, we hit spacebar and it'll go through and play the animation. Now what spacebar is going to do in this case is it's going to play the animation from wherever it's at, okay? You'll notice that in my bar, you may have the same thing in yours. I have a little bit of green, a little bit of green, and a lot of green here, but no green in these 2 areas. The green represents your memory, okay? Basically what's happening is when you hit the play button, every single frame gets saved onto your computer's memory so it can play back at real time. All right, so imagine you open up a picture in Photoshop, and then you open another picture, then you open another picture. In order for After Effects to play those things, it has to save them in a way that can allow for playback. So the green shows what's saved. When I hit play initially, it wasn't updating to show that those 2 areas were there saved, but once I hit stop, then it did show it, okay? So the space bar basically will play straight through. So if I start something and play it, it's just going to go straight through and play as fast as it can. As long as this green bar is loaded up, you should get a real-time feedback of that. You should get something that is playing back at the correct speed. If you see that it's blocky or the green bars are just kind of like hashing in there, you're not getting real time. So what could happen is, and this happens a lot, you're doing an animation, you're like, cool, this is exactly going the right speed that I want this to go. Then it loads all into memory, you see it play back at real time, and it's going like incredibly fast now because you weren't thinking that it was going at real, you were thinking it was going at real time, but it wasn't, okay? So this is our super boring animation of a ball going up and then going down. All right, it definitely needs some work in what we're doing. So this is where we're going to jump over to, all right, so what do you think, if we're going to add squash and stretch to this, what do you think we will control to do that? Scale, okay? So I want to keep my position keyframes up, but now I want to see also scale. If I hit S, scale shows up, but position goes away. If I hit P, position comes up and scale goes away. If I hold down Shift and hit S, I get both, okay? So this is important because we want to link up our scale to be in sync with our time, our position. So if we have the position keyframes already, it makes it much easier to see them and line things up accordingly. So make sure you have scale showing.
You said, how did you have them both up?
Hold Shift and then hit the other one. Okay? So we can do that with anything if I want to add opacity or rotation or whatever. Okay. So I want to add scale. So before he bounces up, we want to add something in there, but we're not going to add that yet. Eventually, one of the principles of animation will get to doing the before. So we're going to imagine that right away he's just kind of like going straight up. Okay, so it's still not going to be perfect, but we'll add stuff in here. So what I want to do is go back to the beginning. So I reset my time marker to 0. So put your time marker all the way back to the beginning. And we want to start setting keyframes for scale. So what do we hit first? The stopwatch. Okay, so we make sure that we're at the beginning. We click the little stopwatch for scale, and we leave it right where it is. Okay, so right at the beginning, our ball is in the exact same spot, perfectly round. As he starts going up, what should happen is, like he said, it should get narrower and longer. That's what should be happening. Okay, so what I don't want to do is go all the way to the end of this. I don't want to go to my 1 second and squish it, because you'll see that that's not going to look very good. Okay, I'm going to show you the wrong way, and then we'll do it together the right way. Okay, so if I go all the way up to 1 and I scale him in like this and I scale him out like that, he looks like he's like stretching towards it. And then when he comes back down like this, I'll reset both of these to 100. There we go. That doesn't look like he's stretching correctly. It looks like he's like stretching out and moving up and then stretching back down. We don't have squash and stretch that makes sense in this case. Okay, so I'm going to undo what I just did. There we go. Okay, so now we're back here. We're back to this. All right, so what we want to do is, what should happen is, as the ball leaves the ground, that's where it's going to be the stretchiest. As the ball comes up to the top, it's going to basically even out and be a circle again. And then as it starts coming back down, it's going to start to stretch out again. Okay, so I'm going to go up 2 frames and then stretch the ball out. Okay, now on your list of hotkeys, you have some timeline keyframes here, or some timeline hotkeys. One of them is going forward 1 frame, and you'll see it's either Control plus the right arrow or page down. So if you want to use Control plus the right arrow, I can nudge over 2 frames. Okay, so hold Control, use the right arrow, and go over to 2 frames. I'm at 2 frames, and then I'm going to squish and stretch the ball. You don't have to do it a crazy amount, just a little bit. Okay, so we have the ball squishing a little bit in, stretching a little bit up. Now we're going to go to 1 second and reset the ball's scales to 100 and 100. Okay, so right now mine's at 72 and 128. You want to reset those. You'll have to unlink them and type in 100 for each one. All right, so looking at a little bit of the physics of what is actually happening. Okay, at what point is the ball going the fastest in this first half of the animation? Frame 2. Right after it leaves the ground, it has to have the most energy moving up, because gravity is pulling it down. So it's basically losing energy as it moves up. Okay, and so right after frame 2, that's when it's the most stretchy. When it gets to the very top, that's when everything kind of like evens out. Its energy is gone, gravity is now winning the battle, and so it's just back to its original shape. So now as it starts to fall down again, it's going to start to pick up momentum, pick up velocity. So then in the second half, where's going to be the fastest? Right, 2 frames before the end, that will be the fastest. So we'll do that. We'll go right before the end of this. Okay, I'll actually go right to the end, and then using my Control and left arrow, I can go back 2 frames and then stretch it out. Okay, so I went to the very end of the animation, went back 2 frames, and then stretched him out again. All right, so far this is what I have. Yours might be a little bit different. Like I said, this is playing around, getting you guys used to working in After Effects, animating stuff, moving things around, setting keyframes, tweaking things, looking at things. So don't expect this to be anything you're going to ever throw in a portfolio. It's just simply getting used to it. After today, hopefully, if everything works with the lecture, this should be available so you can watch it and re-watch it if you need to. And I recommend, if you don't follow along with 80% of what we're doing, to watch it again, because all this stuff that we're doing is going to be repeated every single time you come into class. Okay, not actually repeated, but we're going to be doing the same steps every single class. All right, so we have squash and stretch to this. I've added, you'll see here, here's where he stretched out. He squashes down right at the end, and then I added just another keyframe at the end just to make him go back to being round. Okay, so again, you didn't have to do that extra step. I just like to do it. It still doesn't look neat or perfect. It's definitely better than what it was before. We have some issues we need to tweak, but let's go to the next principle and see what it is. So our next one is anticipation. So we have to communicate that our ball is bouncing. And it's funny because our ball is basically doing what the jumper was doing. It's just flying up in the air, right? So how can we give this some anticipation? Squish it down. When? Before it takes off, right? So what we need to do is we have all of these keyframes right here. I need to shift those keyframes over to give me enough room to allow for that extra bit of animation at the beginning, okay? So After Effects is very responsive in how it does this. All I have to do, I click and drag out of here, see how they're all blue, then I can just drag these over a bit. So I'm just going to give myself a few frames at the beginning. Okay, so to grab all your keyframes and just offset them to the right a few frames. All right, so let's add some anticipation to this. So instead of just going straight up like that, we actually squish down and then come up. Okay, if we're going to squish this thing this way and stretch it out that way, it's going to be floating in the air. So we may also have to add some positional keyframes just to make it look like it's still staying locked on the ground. So if we go back like 2 frames is always a good starting point, and then just tweak it. Just do exactly what you've already done. Stretch it out, squish it down, move it down. And then I'm going to go back a couple more frames and reset them back to 100, 100. Make sure he's flat on the ground. All right, it looks like most of us have this. Now don't be afraid to, once you get a starting point to anything, to tweak it, okay? So one thing with mine that I'm seeing is that initial squish and bounce up, it's happening too quick. You know, you barely see it. It's like a flicker and then it's up. So you know how we can move keyframes around. We can do that for anything. So if I know, if I know which keyframes are what, and you pay attention to these things as you're working, I know that these 2 keyframes here are the ball being perfectly round sitting on the ground. The next 2 keyframes are the ball being squished. This keyframe is just an adjustment one. The next one is the ball being stretched. This one is the ball being round, then the ball being stretched, the ball in the middle of the air, the ball being stretched, squished, and then round again, okay? So as you start working in After Effects, you'll know these are what my keyframes are doing. And if I want to add more time between keyframes, it's literally just moving the space between them, okay? So if I want to take my animation from here to there and here to there and make this a little bit longer, I'm going to grab my keyframes, except for the ones that are here, and just scoot it over. Grab these keyframes and scoot that over. So I can adjust my timing and make things happen longer or shorter, okay? So that'll be, as you go on with all of this stuff, we'll be tweaking that. A couple things we can do just kind of help to tell the story is right now it's kind of, without that guide there, it's kind of floating. So we don't know like where it's actually hitting. So we're just going to do something simple by adding in a ground plane and a background just to help kind of pull it off that. But as you get further into animations, that staging one will be essentially or a lot more critical. Okay, so I want to add in a background. Okay, so how would I add in a background? Shape layer, right? If I just add a new shape layer. Now what I don't want to do, if I'm clicked on this shape layer and I add something to it, everything will be animated on that shape layer. So my ground and background will be moving and stretching and squashing. So I have to make sure that I click off of the shape layer and then go up here to a rectangle and then double click. And I get a new background. Okay. Once you have that, you may notice that your ball is now gone. So why is the ball gone? Layers on top. So I just switch the layers. Drag one above the other. And then I'm going to click off both of those layers and add another one, another rectangle, that I'm just going to draw in as my ground. Oops. What we've done already with this is pose-to-pose action. We've set keyframes, and then we've gone through and we tweaked the stuff that's in between them as we needed to. Okay, most of the stuff you're going to do in here is going to be like that. Typically, if you were to do like a flip book, you've seen the flip book where you draw one picture and go to the next one. You could do that using straight ahead, like he was talking about. You could do that with pose-to-pose, where you have initial keyframes set up. So we're not going to do that one for this. They just want to show both sides of that. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're about 2 hours in. We're going to save our work, and then we're going to be pretty much done for the day. Okay. So we're going to hit Control S, and then we're going to put this inside of our P drive, your folder in the work, and we're going to make a new folder called Playing Around. So inside of your work folder, make a new folder called Playing Around. And then just give it the title of your last name, Playing Around. And you can put what it is, Ball Bounce. All right, once you have it saved, then you can just close After Effects. So you just go to File, Exit, and After Effects goes away.